Hey, I'm Joe, and I'm a composer and a musician.
That's why we call you the maestro. And I'm Will. I'm a literal doctor.
But don't trust this guy with your ailments.
No, I study comic books, but it still counts.
We're a couple of creative kids who host a podcast called Common Creatives.
We dig deep into filmmakers, musicians, books, and characters, really all types of artistic works and the people who make them.
We break apart the art we love to see what makes it tick.
Basically, we give you the definitive take on whatever or whoever we're discussing. All opinions are definitive and final.
So check out Common Creatives wherever you listen to podcasts.
Welcome to the Eleventy Life podcast.
What's up, Eleventy fam? Matt here. Welcome to this week's episode of Eleventy Life. I am really happy that you're here. For everybody who is brand new to this show, my name is Matt Langston. My band is Eleventyseven. I am a songwriter, a mix engineer, a producer. I make records and I write songs. And I am absolutely in love with the transcendent nature of creativity, so I talk to people about it. Songwriters, artists, mix engineers, people within the music industry, other creators that I just find fascinating because I love their work, other podcasters. And sometimes I just get on the phone with friends or fans and see what they have to say about life. We have an absolutely incredible show planned for you today. I have the honor and the privilege of doing another crossover episode between this podcast, Eleventy Life, and another podcast that is on our network that you may not know about yet. It is called Common Creatives, and it is by these two guys, Will and Joe, who do deep dives into the artistry that comprises pop culture, and they're so much fun to hang out with. We did an entire episode talking about pop punk, the genre of rock and roll known to all of us as pop punk. Our band absolutely started out being a pop punk band. It's how we landed our first record deal. This was a genre that had a ton of influence on us as people. So we just dive into all of those facets of this genre on this episode of Eleventy Life. If you have not checked out Will and Joe's podcast, Common Creatives, yet, you're missing out. Get your shit together. It's just hitting a subscribe button, and that's all it will take to make their day. Big hugs and high fives to everybody over at the Eleventy Life Facebook group. You people blow me away with how kind and generous and loving and careful that you are with each other. I absolutely love it. It is one of the highlights of my week to be able to check in on everybody there and see what they're up to. A big old rock candy thank you to everybody who is saving our brand new album, Basic Glitches, on Spotify right now. Every time that you hit that save button or that you hit that follow button for our band, it helps us continue to keep doing what we're doing here with this podcast, with new music, with the world of rock candy at large. So thank you to everybody who's done that. And if you haven't done that yet, check it out. For all of the regular listeners to the show and people who are a part of the Eleventy fam, I miss you all tremendously, and I can't wait for us to be back together hanging out once this COVID-19 pandemic is figured out. In the meantime, let's simply be content to fail at making unicorn-themed food that we find on Pinterest. And without further ado, here's this week's Eleventy Life with Will and Joe from Common Creatives.
Same.
Now I'm recording.
So, Will's just going to be in a void.
Yeah.
And just so you guys know, Will usually cuts up our episodes in a way to where, like, I sound more articulate than I am in real life. No. And I'm assuming you're not going to do that, Matt, on your end. So I'm going to go ahead and just apologize to your listeners right now that I feel like I'm more intelligent than I sound unedited.
Oh, okay. Is that your ego talking?
Yes. Yes, it is.
Are you protecting something that might be delicate?
Maybe.
You're fine. You're very articulate. It's
yeah,
all good.
I have. So I don't think you need to worry about that. I think you will end up being far more well-spoken than I am going to be. And I am definitely that person that, like, goes into all of the Eleventy Life episodes that we do, and most of the time I'll remove ums or any spaces that seem suspect when I'm looking at it, linearly, just to to throw a bone to the people that took the time to listen to the conversation,
Of course,
right?
Yeah.
Totally.
So
We have a ongoing joke though that like, you know, people usually listen to like half of it probably, right? So like after the halfway point, like they're not, they don't care anymore.
To be clear,
They're fixed, right?
to be clear, I edited it all the way through though. So,
Yeah.
all right. Do we need to do in terms of getting started? Do we need to do claps?
Hey, we
Does
already
that make
started.
sense? Oh, we already started. Oh my!
Yeah, we're started,
Oh my goodness!
dog.
Oh man, it's that nerd.
We're in
it's
it.
that nerdist shit. Remember that where they would be talking and the guests would be like, "When are you gonna start?" Oh man,
Do we
I'm
need
such
to
a fool.
sync? Is that what you're saying?
Yes,
Sync
that's what I
clap?
was asking. I didn't know if that was a thing for you, Matt, or not.
no, it's fine. If you
Okay.
guys need it, I can
No.
can sync clap with you. If you're, I'm all about getting an audience clapping. I mean, there's nothing to get the blood going like like a little bit of positive affirmation from the crowd.
We should just start opening all of our podcasts with applause for ourselves. Just a little affirmation. Well, yeah.
Oh yes, morning radio DJs love doing that.
Absolutely. Well, if we're already started, then I'm going to say thanks for having us, Matt. And
Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
I feel I'm a huge fan of your show, and it always feels good whenever the handshake that you get back is firm
course.
but not aggressive.
absolutely.
Whatever that means.
Do you ever wonder, like, okay, so, okay, since we're talking about pop punk, I might as well
Sure.
start to talk about my corporate handshake, right?
Okay, excellent.
So, like,
Your something corporate handshake? Sorry.
Ooh.
Sorry.
It's already started.
Oh God.
That's brilliant. That's brilliant.
I think I need to ease off a little bit. Like,
Oh, yeah?
I think I'm trying to I think I'm projecting because like we talked a little bit like right before we started recording.
Yeah.
Like y'all didn't hear it, but like, Matt and I and Will to an extent. He was a quitter early
Yeah, I quit.
on, but we share a similar kind of background with kind of touring for a long time and then like trying to figure out who you were after like your band was over, although he's still making music. And maybe I should do that. Maybe I should.
Oh God, I thought you were describing a handshake.
Oh, we're getting there.
For the okay, we're getting there.
this-
We're getting there. This is a build up. This is a build up.
no,
I'm ready. I'm on board.
This is the derail.
This is
year
the
I was
preamble.
talking about.
This is the preamble right here. Yeah.
Yeah. So okay, you that's who you are, right? And you're like,
Yes.
Okay, well, I'm like wearing like tight jeans
Sure.
and like my hair's flopped over my eye and
Yeah.
like I'm playing guitar and I'm kind of strutting in a feminine way, but it's
Sure.
cool, right?
Yeah,
like so
yeah.
that's who you are. And then like you start working for like corporate people and then they come in and then their hands are bigger than yours and then you have to and like
I did not think that was going to be the other part of the sentence.
and then like some of them like the okay, I didn't say this, so I don't know if anyone that I work with is listening to this.
Sure, yeah.
But
Yeah.
But
one of the creatives I work with who is my age, he refers to some of the other creatives he works with as people who have the boomer shrug. Like when like
The boomer shrug.
yeah,
Okay,
like so
I didn't
like
know
when
about
like
this.
when like a like when a global pandemic happens, they're like, I'll go in anyway, kind of thing. But those
yeah.
Yeah.
guys, their hands are big
Yeah.
and they have calluses on their hands somehow. But all they do is like they write copy for like
they just
ads.
type real hard. Yeah.
So, so I
Yeah,
think
that's
yeah.
weird.
Yeah, it's weird, and I think after this whole thing blows over, like I think I'm gonna have to like redefine my handshake and be
Sure.
a little bit more true to myself.
So you think-
and not try to overcompensate for like, hey, I'm a big hand tough copywriter.
So you're pretending
Two.
that you're not a pop punk kid who's pretending to
and
corporately
that's
shake
Will
hands.
trying to bring
Is that
it
what you
back
see?
in.
Yeah,
You see what
that?
he did there?
You see that? Yeah,
like-
absolutely. That's called a
He's like
swinging
you know,
back
that is-
onto the vines.
pop punk
Yeah.
kid.
Yes. Of course.
Yeah.
So before we move on to pop
Yes.
punk, I just want to come alongside of you and just pat you on the back for your handshake story.
Thank you.
I don't know what to do with handshake shit either. My dad is a overshaker. You know, he's going to squeeze it just a little bit more than normal, not in a like rapey way.
Yeah.
I'm afraid that's who I'm becoming, and I don't like that about myself, you know?
Well, here's the thing. I went through a phase where I tried some different shit out, okay? So like when I was like, you know, my handshake could do some work. I was exactly where you were. Yeah. And I know you because I was you. And I remember being at this funeral, and you know, I didn't know the people that were at the funeral, but I was like going through the line anyway. Yeah. And so I get there, we're like standing in front of the body, and I like shake the person's hand, and for whatever reason, I just like really wanted this person to know that like I knew that I didn't have any reason being there, but I was just trying to be supportive, that like I can also be human. I've experienced loss too. And like, I'm so sorry that this is what you're going through right now. The way that manifested itself was I shook with my right hand, but then I took my left hand and I like cupped his elbow.
Yeah.
It was so fucking
That's
weird.
the preacher shake, right? That's the like, yeah. Good to see you this morning.
So after I did it, this is like this man has experienced a loss in his life, and as soon as I did it, I become self-conscious. I hijacked the funeral. It's all about me now. And I was like, I'm sorry, I was like, I don't normally shake hands like this. I don't know why. I'm so sorry for you. I'm sorry, and for me, I was just completely like. Eventually, I just quit talking and walked away. I have no idea what this person thought about me. What he probably still thinks.
That's so funny.
Hopefully he just forgot about it. Hopefully his grief overshadows my embarrassment.
You were like, the real tragedy today is this handshake.
The real thing we won't recover from is this.
That's the thing. You tour in a band for so long, you're just used to, like, you're on a stage, like, of course everything's about you, right? Like,
this whole room.
You train yourself.
This whole room is
like,
architecturally set up to be about me.
Right.
It's like, I'm digging deep, but that was a little hard to like shake for me, you know, like take a back seat. I was the lead singer of a rock and roll band. Okay.
So that is a weird thing. People are paying you with, you know, as a lead singer of a band, and you can attest to this for sure. Like your whole job is to run the room.
Yeah.
Like is to befriend everybody in the room and basically elevate the mood and like keep the mood up.
It's a lot of elbows to cup.
It's a lot of elbows to cup. It's a lot of apologies at funerals later. Yeah. It's a lot of, should we go to catering afterwards or not? I don't know. Yeah. So anyway, I totally understand. I understand the weirdness. So now I guess we can get back on the pop punk train.
I think Will's like, he's like, should I, like, now I've been called out like twice now.
Here's the thing. I don't appreciate this commentary as to what I'm doing in the podcast precisely because you know me too well. You can read everything I do. We've been friends for far too long for you to be doing this. It's too accurate.
He's thinking, right, like, guys,
it's
like this podcast,
accurate, guys.
It has a title, right?
Our communication is more and more like an elderly married couple in these moments because you take thoughts out of my head somehow. Yes, we're talking about pop punk today. I can't. I have to do it.
That's amazing. So you guys are like the couple from Up?
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Oh, is that the best way to describe it?
It is.
Absolutely, it is.
Complete with funeral.
Absolutely. Yes, exactly. Well, you guys are both or were. I'm not sure what language to use, Matt. Were singers in pop punk bands, although you guys aren't really pop punk anymore, I guess, right? Like, you don't consider yourself that anymore, right? Or do you?
No.
Yeah. You want to give us like a 30-second history of who you are and where you came from?
That's a good idea.
It's super boring for your audience.
For your
audience,
we
are doing a crossover episode here. Like, I don't know if you guys have been watching like the Arrow in Flash crossovers, but it's very similar.
Very
like,
similar.
all you have to do is watch those. You don't have to watch the rest of the season.
Very similar.
Only ours has better effects.
Absolutely, it does.
It does.
Yep.
Oh man. Yeah. So I can give you a quick 30-second overview of my life up until now. Chapter 1, overparenting. So like a lot of kids growing up. So I entered high school in the year 2000. That was like,
did we as well?
Yeah, we did as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I think we're
the
all
exact same age.
Nice.
Okay. Awesome. So we all ache now in the same parts of our bodies.
Exactly.
It's like our
very
spider
true.
sense is tingling. Like, oh my God, Will and Joe are aching too. So we were heavily influenced by a lot of these pop punk bands that were saturating this programming that was happening in the world. Like MTV was phasing out music, but also they were playing these chunks of music still. Yeah. And Fuse TV was a thing.
Yep.
So there were entire channels that were dedicated to this. The internet is coming of age. Like Napster is a thing. All of a sudden, all of our music is free. And we just got completely inundated with a lot of these pop punk bands growing up, like Blink-182, MXPX, NoFX, Newfound Glory. And so the thing about those bands that was so accessible was that they weren't doing anything virtuosic, if that's the right word.
Yeah.
Or virtuistic? Virtuosic.
It's like, thank God for Brain Stew for teaching me how to play the guitar.
Yeah, right.
Yes, exactly.
Yes.
And I was like, this is, okay, so I can move my hands at about that speed, you know?
And the left one, as long as you can like keep it exactly looking the same way,
you just
and
gotta hold
move it
that
around.
same formation, 1 and 5.
Yeah.
That's all you need.
Yes. Yeah. And so we literally learned how to play instruments by watching other bands do it. And then, look up whatever sort of archaic, very, very primal tutorials that were available online, because YouTube hadn't quite come into its own. It might not have even been around back then.
Yeah.
So we started out in a band, and I totally grew up in this like Protestant evangelical subculture. So I was very familiar with a lot of the pop punk bands that they were signing. To sort of try to approximate music that was happening in the real world. Of pop punk. And so that was like a huge dream of mine. I was like, I can be in a morally secure rock band, that's got a little bit of an edge. And so like we're kind of, we rebel in our own way, but it's against,
for sure.
It's against, the world and against sin or whatever the hell.
It's like a double negative. It's rebelling against rebellion or something like that, right?
Yes. It's like I still get to be the kid with the leather jacket, but everything around me is completely safe.
That's right.
And so am I, for that matter.
Completely
Like
safe.
I won't be caught dead smoking a joint behind the church. So it was like that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So we start out playing pop punk because honest to God, it was the only thing that we could play.
Sure.
We didn't have the chops or the talent to do anything more than that.
Yeah.
Plus, it's just so damn fun.
Right.
It is so fun. Yes. And it requires minimal investment. Like once you kind of get your Fender starter pack, you're ready to go, bud.
The Squire starter pack.
Yeah, right.
Remember?
Oh well, of course.
Sure.
Of course.
Sure.
That was a little more on par with my budget for sure. As a teenager. So our band starts out as a pop punk band. We end up getting signed to an independent Christian record label called Flicker. It was run by these guys in this band called Audio Adrenaline, who we had grown up listening to.
Mm-hmm.
Weren't the biggest fans
Sure.
of their band
Sure.
or their music, but I can still say to this day, like I go back and listen to Audio Adrenaline records sometimes, and I think that those records sound amazing.
Yeah.
I think that there's some incredible songwriting that's happening, even amidst all of the weird haze and kind of bullshit
They had like
the Christian music
They had like
industry.
a sort of like phase where they were sort of a 70s, like they toyed with a little psychedelia kind of vibe or like a sort of hippie 70s. What was that one record where they covered they covered some 70s song, Free Ride or something? What was that record called? Bloom, maybe? Does that sound familiar to anybody? An Audio Adrenaline record? Yeah. That was kind of fun.
I don't know how many high fives we're going to get from people for giving callbacks to this subsect of music at all, but it was really influential on us.
Yeah.
And so,
no, Will's got a 90s Christian rock episode planned for the future.
Oh, absolutely.
So.
Yeah.
oh man, I'm already a fan of that.
Absolutely.
It's not even created yet. So, hit that subscribe button.
That's right.
Link in the description below.
Right. Oh gosh, where
I'm sorry, I cut you off with Audio
Oh yeah, I was
Adrenaline.
giving a
Yeah.
30-second / 30-minute explanation of something. Yeah, so we we start working with a friend of ours who was just getting started as a producer. We paid him to do our first, what we thought was going to be like our first full-length record. And So we recorded all of that stuff. He was friends with some of the guys in Audio Adrenaline, so he kept sending them songs that he was working on with us. So at the time, Flickr is realizing that they are being looked at by Sony and that there's a good chance that they could sell their record label and actually make money from owning a record label by cashing out. And so I think in an effort to inflate their numbers to be able to make this sale worth it, they were looking for bands that were pop punk. And so we just so happened to head to the top of that list for some reason. And over the course of a couple of years, you know, it seemed like nothing was going to happen. And I was literally maybe a week or so from just calling and dissolving the band altogether and just be like, hey, we should just do real things with our lives. And this is probably not going to work out. And then we got a phone call. And they were like, if you guys are willing to put college on hold and make touring, you know, your thing for the next few years and give this a go, we'd really like to plug you guys into the social pipeline. And so it kind of all happened overnight. Like that summer, we ended up going to Knoxville and recording a record, like an actual full-length record with a guy named Travis Wyrick, who I still don't know why they paired us with him. He was working with like POD and Disciple and like all these heavy buttcore bands. And it was like I don't think it was like the best fit sonically for us, but it was a huge, huge learning experience for us, like working with an actual producer and seeing how records get made that labels release to the world.
Yeah, definitely.
So and I think over time, by the time our second record rolled around, I had always been super into synthesizers, and I had already started like my first year of college sort of writing all of these loops and drum beats and synthesizer sounds on a cracked version of Fruity Loops. And so instead of doing actual studying in college, I was just learning how to program. Because I loved it. I was really, really drawn to like 90s dance music and 80s new wave. And I had discovered the Pet Shop Boys and New Order and Human League and all of these bands that for a kid growing up in rural South Carolina, this is like, oh my God, this music sounds so colorful and it's like overtly sexual and nobody's ashamed of what they're doing. And this like, I wasn't the most masculine kid by any stretch of the imagination. So seeing all of these people that were kind of gender bending and not really ashamed that there were aspects of them that were, I guess for the time, I would have called it effeminate. I was like, I love this. I don't have to play like the I'm man enough to be a part of the group kind of game. With that genre of music. And so I just felt automatically like I connected to it on a bunch of weird random levels that I only, you know, in the past few years have been able to put a vocabulary to. So yeah, that was cool. And then over time, we just sort of, our sound keeps evolving, becoming more and more synthesizer heavy. I'm programming more because I don't know how to manage interpersonal relationships within the band. So I'm taking more and more power and becoming a creative monopoly within the band. And I have a whole podcast about that. But yeah, I think I'm just sort of following my creative folly wherever it's taking me and doing the things that I think are really interesting. And so ultimately our band kind of ends up where it is today, which is very much like this over the top kind of electro pop stuff with maybe a little bit of that pop punk energy thrown into it, I would say.
I think you can tell from your latest record that you still have some influence from that, right? I mean, you can tell that that's sort of the tradition that you're working out of, even though it's clear that, at least to me, when I listen to it, it's not where you are now. You know what I mean? But sort of structurally and energy-wise, as you were saying, it seems like, oh yeah, it makes sense that that's sort of where you came from or something, you know?
Yeah, there's like, so, and I'm sure that you guys can relate to this too, like being in a pop punk band, it's like you kind of get used to, oh, this is how songs feel. This is how it feels whenever a chorus hits and like we're gonna modulate up a little bit and head to the blast beat, or this was going to be halftime, and like you get in that,
and then the bridge is like the chorus, but you turn the distortion pedal off, and then the drums stop.
Yeah, exactly. It makes the regular chorus punch when it comes back in.
Oh, that's it, man.
No, it's super interesting to hear that, like, you know, at that time, like, it makes complete sense that a label like Flickr is thinking like, okay, MTV is like flooding with you had Green Day and then Blink and then all of these bands and then what I call the pop punk baby boom, this thing that happened on MTV, right? This cultural phenomenon, what that is pop punk, convinced all of us that we could do exactly what they were doing. And it became easier and easier to kind of record your own demos, and then this whole thing kind of snowballed to where there were so many bands for so long, and it would completely make sense, especially early on, that a label like that's going to say, okay, we need to catch up, especially in the Christian market. We can't just have Reliant K. That doesn't work. We need, X amount of equivalents. But no, that's interesting.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
Absolutely. And I feel like that whole subculture, not even the Christian aspect of it, but what was happening within the world of pop punk in the world at large at that time, that was our American dream, man. I mean, I'm sure you can relate to that, but we didn't want picket fences and families and kids and doing that whole thing. We were like, no, our American dream is touring in a van.
Totally. Yeah.
And playing shows and getting loud and sweaty and
it's so funny when you're talking about having those conversations with folks about if you guys are willing to put off college and if you're willing to make touring your primary thing. That brought back such a flood of nostalgia for me when you were talking about that. I did it.
We dropped out of college together for
and we had those conversations. We had a conversation with, and granted, Joe went a lot farther than I did, but neither of us went as far as you did into it. But I remember having those conversations with the producer that we were working with, and a couple other bands, and I don't even remember who else we would have been talking to, but it was folks who were in the business more than we were, who were well, you need to seriously think about not doing classes next year and making this your thing and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah,
and it's just so.
I remember having that thought that oh no, I'm not allowed. I'm not allowed to do that.
Yeah, sure.
Whatever that means.
Yeah, no.
And it was this, that was the first moment where I thought, oh, I'm kind of in control of whatever I choose to do, just generally. It's this idea of well, I guess this is growing.
Yeah, right. Who is segueing back now, my man?
Dog, I didn't have that plan. It just felt right.
So that's it.
That's so interesting. So I do have a question, because you talked about finding new wave stuff and more electronic stuff and getting into that for various reasons. Do you think, the way you talked about it just now made it sort of sound like pop punk was kind of an accident of history for you? Do you think that were there things about pop punk or punk more generally that you are or were really attracted to or attached to? Or do you think it was more the accessibility, just the fact that you could make it work with the people you knew and all this kind of thing? You know what I mean?
It was all of that.
Yeah.
It was that I could with my best friends get into a room and we could approximate what we were seeing on television.
Right.
We could play a song in key.
Yeah.
We knew which chords went where. It was, and I think that we were really attracted to the attitude of pop punk, which was kind of this fuck it attitude, but also kind of carried a lot of this social awareness with it as well. If that makes any sense. I know I don't think that parents at the time, or at that particular time in history, looked at pop punk and would have thought that. But it was definitely, punk. We knew that punk had its roots in this sort of weird kind of political backlash.
Yeah, most definitely.
That it came from this unrest. Yeah. And I think that every generation of teenagers absolutely experiences that.
Sure.
So for us, it was appropriated perfectly, because we were we have our own set of frustrations and in things that we believe are injustices and ways that in which we feel the generation, our parents' generation, truly do not get us. They don't get our problems. They don't get how they're going to put us in therapy when we're their age, kind of a thing.
Yeah.
And so I think that's really cool. And I almost feel like this, I'm obviously not a doctor, so this is not me giving any sort of medical advice or psychological advice, but I feel like it was really therapeutic at the time.
Yeah.
It was a really safe way to channel this kind of weird pent up energy that we got from being particularly within that subsect of Christianity growing up.
Right. Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's super interesting, and makes a lot of sense. And I think that sort of unrest, or that sort of like that you find in going back to just straight up, punk rock back in probably the 70s and 80s, and then it gets changed in the like era that we're mostly talking about, and that we grew up in, right?
I think what's interesting is I wholeheartedly believe that, I think Green Day played a big role, but I don't think if it weren't for Blink, I don't think it would have happened in the way it happened.
Yeah.
And I think that's because they weren't overtly political or any of those things. Like if you go back and listen to Blink, they're talking about like their first date.
They were not a fight the man band.
No. And I think that made it kind of attractive more like generally, but they were definitely a gateway band, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Like you don't, I wouldn't have known, NoFX if it weren't for, all the small things, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Well, and that's kind of where I wanted to go with that comment is like talking about the unrest and the sort of fuck it attitude. That range, like there's a range of fuck it attitudes from like Blink 182 on the sort of safe, for lack of a better term. I love Blink, but like the more safe sort of fuck it in terms of like we're gonna use dirty words in silly ways and it'll make your parents uncomfortable.
No, that is
all
true.
The way to like earlier this week I just listened to NoFX's The Decline all the way through. Like that is a very different type
I cannot believe you did that. I did the same thing.
Did you really?
3 days ago.
Man,
yes,
dude. It came into my mind. I was thinking about this episode coming up and stuff, and I was like, dude, I haven't listened to The Decline in like a while. And so I pulled it up and I was like, this is a fucking masterpiece. Like I love this thing.
I bought The Decline in CD form when it came out at Walmart in a small town in Kentucky.
Oh, so that the CD itself was an experience.
Yes.
Because it was like half of it was clear and they only had like the digital part, like they only had the gray area towards the center as much as they needed.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I sound like a complete idiot describing it.
No, but it's it's you open it up and it's already like, oh, this is different.
And if memory serves correctly, I'm probably paraphrasing this in the wrong way, but I believe it was the Decline that on the back of it said something to the effect of like, do not pay more than $5.99 for this album or something like that. It was like printed on the album art, like do not.
It was part of it. Yeah.
It was like do not pay more than this much. And it was like, God, that's just man. When I was a teenager, that was just powerful as shit. I was like, oh my God, they're sticking it to them.
3 minutes goes by and it's still going. It's still going.
They hit that refrain with the trombone and you're like, oh, we're closing in. And then you look and it's like 12 minutes left. But all that to say, those are very different, ways to understand rebellion. And it's interesting that it can encompass all of that. That pop punk can.
Yeah, because everybody's rebelling against something. I feel like it's this weird sort of teenage, early 20s way of boundary testing and figuring out where you live and where you fit and what things actually are acceptable and what things you can get away with and how far are we going to be able to stretch?
Sure, yeah. And
in a lot of ways.
Like what things are actually good and bad, right? I feel like for folks like me and Joe and you, when you're raised in a particular subculture, which is like a Southern American Protestant Christianity, right? When you're raised in that, you're told certain things are good, certain things are bad, and then these bands and this whole musical tradition kind of offers you a way to question that. I suppose what really is good and what really is bad, right? And how do you figure that out or something?
Yeah, you are in your own way. You're developing your own agency of being able to decide for yourself.
Yeah.
So you're like deciding what your values are going to be and which things you're going to call bullshit on.
Yeah,
I guess.
Yeah.
So
no, most definitely. So we mentioned Green Day and we mentioned Blink. Those are sort of the two big touch points that I have in my notes.
Right,
I'm just imagining your notes in front of you, and it just says Blink.
It just says that. It's just 100 point
check marks now.
Check marks.
That was over.
We did it. Thank you.
I think that's what's interesting is that you've pop punk in general, like it was like it was like the big bang of this genre, but like it spawns so many different kind of like smaller genres to where it's like, you're not going to call My Chemical Romance a pop punk band.
Right.
You're going to, you're going to call them one of the best things that happened out of it.
Well, but but at the same time, I mean, you can't really talk about My Chemical Romance without talking about it.
Absolutely.
I mean,
not.
it's part of the musical tradition and part of the lineage without question, but it's after those things are developing based on new cultural contexts. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
So one thing that came to mind when we were talking about Green Day, do you guys remember seeing, I mean, I know we were all young at this time, but do you remember seeing clips of like them playing Woodstock 94? Do you guys remember this?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, where they were like hurling.
It was mind-blowing for us.
Oh, man, it was amazing. So there's a chance I'm conflating this in my mind, but were they naked or were the Red Hot Chili Peppers the only ones who were naked? In my mind.
I think the Chili Peppers were known for doing that, not just there, but kind of any chance that they had.
Right. So I just remember Green Day hurling mud back at the audience, and then the audience hurling mud at Green Day, but I didn't remember if they were naked while they did it. So yeah.
That was. I always kind of felt like I always loved Green Day songs, but there was always this kind of like edge.
Yeah. There
was this aggression that I feel like I experienced from them that didn't feel nearly as fun as bands like Blink-182, like what you were saying earlier. Sure. Blink-182 for me was like, oh my God, these are very real snapshots. Like kids in suburbia of white kids in suburbia. And this is what's important to them. And this is what they mean when they say their world is falling apart. This is, it's so low pressure, but it's relate so much to all of that emotion that was happening. Cause you're like, I'm the white kid.
Yeah.
These are my problems.
Yeah. And it's a sort of musical tradition that validates all that. And I think, going back to what Joe said about like, it starts with the sort of big bang of either Green Day or Blink-182, but like after that, you get so many little sub threads of things that spin off from that. And I think you talking about the emoting, like that makes me think, like Taking Back Sunday, where you get all this sort of, for
and those guys still jam.
Yeah.
Okay.
No,
those guys. Yeah.
Those guys are super good.
Well, I think early on in high school you learn that like if the band is wearing a pair of Dickies shorts, they're probably good to go.
They're good, man. They got the outfit certified.
Yeah,
oh my gosh.
Maybe their hat's on backwards, but tilted slightly to the left,
side. Yeah.
Yeah.
Dude, it's the pop punk starter kit.
Right.
I feel like that meme was like kind of popular on the internet for a second, and it was. Yeah, if you had a Hurley T-shirt, like, dude, okay, we can
Hurley
play
T-shirts, Atticus T-shirts.
Yes.
Actually, Will and I in high school, I wore an Atticus T-shirt every day to school almost
every day, man.
And he had this Star Wars T-shirt that had Darth Maul on it because it was about that time when that movie came out.
It was time for a Darth Maul T-shirt.
We had a school bully who used to call us Atticus and Darth Maul.
Yeah.
Wow.
So like, it runs deep. So it runs true.
We're legit. Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
I'm like, yeah. Okay.
Which I think is fascinating because I recently kind of put those the first three movies on in the background.
Oh yeah.
I'm sorry, in the septology. What is it now? The neontology. No, fuck you, man. I don't know what you're saying anymore.
All right, you're making it weird.
Right. So the ones that came out in the 2000s, like, okay. So
the
anyway,
prequels.
The good ones.
Prequels.
Right.
Yeah.
So I wonder if there's a musical equivalent to like within everything cool that was happening in pop punk at the time, if it has its own kind of Star Wars trilogy with Jar Jar. That was just really disappointing that everybody got on board because it was just part, because everybody was wearing the same clothes because everybody had the Dickie shorts and you saw a pair of Dickie shorts and you just didn't know Jar Jar was wearing them.
Yeah, and then you buy the Simple Plan record and it's like,
okay,
am I throwing shade at Simple Plan when I shouldn't?
I think
things get weird.
Well, I think you are throwing it, and I'm not sure that you should not. So like, I do have a point in my notes because I'm a notes boy. I do have a point in my notes that just says shitty ones. So because we're close by, I'll read these out.
Yeah.
No offense to anyone who loves any of these bands.
Before you get into that, I
Yeah.
do think like there are a large group of them that like you're on board at first,
Sure.
and then like you start to like siphon or not siphon. What's like like when you're like you got like dirt and gold and you got
I
the
know
little
what you're
thingy.
saying. You
Right.
yeah.
Your taste develops.
Sifting.
You're
You have to
sifting.
sift through.
Yeah.
The majority of the shorts.
Yeah.
And the caps.
Definitely.
Yes.
Yeah. So
to eventually.
So I'm thinking of, no, go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. No.
Okay.
No.
Well, the only three that I have under shitty ones that I couldn't remember are SR-71. Apologies to those guys.
Okay.
Phoenix TX.
Okay.
Who were a band for a minute, and then American Hi-Fi is the other one that I have. And it's less that I think any of these are like explicitly shitty, like I hate them, and it's more just like it felt like all that they were bringing to the party were the tropes that we all knew. You know what I mean? So it felt like they weren't adding to the conversation though.
Yeah, those are some really interesting choices.
Really?
Because like I feel like in the Venn diagram of in the middle being like the pop punk Godfathers or whatever. I feel like SR-71 is going to be really far out there on the edge to where it's like I don't know that their entryway was the same as all. I think they were just like, oh, we're kind of like a pop rock band.
Oh, that's
too,
interesting. Okay.
Versus like Good Charlotte, who is like
Right. Well, I feel like you see a lot of that in the industry, and you're right. It is kind of like sifting for gold, and eventually the mud kind of falls out.
Sure.
And what you're left with is what you're left with. But you also have bands, like when we were coming up, it was very much, there's Blink-182, there's Bowling for Soup, there's Simple Plan, there's Newfound Glory.
Yeah.
All of these bands are coexisting in that ecosphere together and doing it really well. And then because pop punk is really popular, you have these bands that I got introduced to, like Fountains of Wayne.
Right.
right.
Who end up having a cool song like Stacy's Mom.
Yeah.
And then a record label sort of appropriating that into the pop punk world. And Fountains of Wayne is clearly not
no, absolutely
a
not.
pop punk band, but they get lumped into those to that,
They
that
had the
genre.
They had the single that like jumped in there and worked. Yeah.
Right. But they are an amazing band in their own right.
Sure.
And I know that, I don't know if you guys are fans of them at all.
I mean, I have heard people who I very much respect talk really well about them. It's more that kind of thing where like I'm aware that they're probably very good, but I just haven't done that sort of due diligence myself and dove in, right?
Sure.
But I've heard that. I've heard that as a sort of consistent refrain of like Fountains of Wayne is a lot better than most people understand that they are, or something.
Right. And just to echo that, it's like we wouldn't put on Fountains of Wayne for the same reasons that we would put on all this other pop punk music.
Sure.
Like we would throw on a Newfound Glory CD because we're like, fuck yeah, let's get pumped. This is awesome. This is our life. This is our energy. This is like who we're going to be. Yeah. And Fountains of Wayne was much more like a textbook.
Yeah.
It was much more like, this is how songwriting gets done.
Yeah.
And this is like your roadmap for everything that's happening underneath how loud the guitars and drums are.
Wow.
Like it was just an excellent primer in crafting a really, really cool pop tune and drawing from all of these other places like the Beatles and the Beach Boys.
Yeah, sure. Right.
Going way farther back.
Yeah. That's really cool. Do you have a like one of their records that's like, if I want an on-ramp to sort of Fountains of Wayne that I should check into?
Yeah. So Welcome Interstate Managers is the song.
That's the one with Hackensack on it, right?
Yeah. So that one's got Hackensack. It's got
like
Stacy's
the big
mom.
Song I know.
Yeah.
Other than Stacy's mom, obviously.
It's kind of amazing. I mean, I'll quit tooting the Fountains of Wayne horn here in a second, because if you're not into them, then you're not into them. But I feel like their songs are probably, I think I have an emotional connection to them in a way that they feel very nourishing for me. So if I feel depleted creatively, I can always put on a Fountains of Wayne song, and there's this energy there that's very easy to draw from. It feels very comfortable. It's like a warm blanket.
Sure.
So,
well, that's really
anyway,
cool. Yeah.
Is it?
It is.
Okay.
Yes.
It is.
I will confirm. Yes. So another thing that came to my mind when I was thinking through this stuff is the sort of...
Sorry, Dolly is upset. If you guys can hear her, I'm in the basement. She's upstairs.
Yeah.
She's just feeling very,
She's
out.
feeling very.
yeah. She's feeling very. So
Yeah.
somebody probably walked by the house.
Oh my Lord.
Like, I'm not kidding.
That's dangerous.
Like, that's not a joke.
That's not,
like,
that is not okay. They need to know.
Well, you guys were talking about these other bands like SR-71.
Yeah.
Just to maybe, I don't know, try to put that train back on the rail.
Sure.
I feel like you also had these acts that got attributed in the mainstream or that were described in the mainstream in all of these different outlets as being very pop punk, who, if you were into pop punk, they clearly were not. So Fountains of Wayne for sure would have been one of them. But also acts that blew up, like Avril Lavigne.
Yes.
oh, sure.
People were like, "Oh my God, she's like this pop punk." I mean, I would watch these interviews, with people from her record label who were like, "Yeah, she's just got this really cool pop punk style and vibe and everything."
Right.
And if you were a part of that scene, like I feel like all of us were. Not that we're, I'm just giving my experience from it. I'm not I'm not the guy to come to about any of it, but. It was very much like, these are grown-ups talking about something that they have no idea.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Right. Like, she clearly is not, she's her own thing and it's really cool and you can be into it, but don't call her punk rock.
Yeah.
Right.
It felt like, and I don't want to I don't know her body of work well enough to speak to it in any sort of way. So with that caveat out of the way, it felt very much to me at the time like she had taken some of the sort of window dressing of the sort of pop punk world.
Yeah, it's capitalizing on a thing.
Yeah,
that's right.
And I wonder the extent to which she was actually just really into that, and the extent to which they were like, it would be really cool if we could have a guy skateboarding in one of your songs.
Right.
You know what I mean?
She seemed a lot more manufactured.
Right. Yeah.
Than the other bands did, which I don't know everybody's backstory. So Blink-182 might have been the most manufactured band of all time. I don't know.
Right. Yeah.
But it didn't come across that way. It felt like there was a level of integrity between all of these bands.
Yeah. Well, and also I wonder if Avril Lavigne sort of gets lumped into that world because of her relationship with the Sum 41 guy,
Yeah, she married the Sum 41 guy.
Yeah.
And then she married a Nickelback guy.
Whoa. Okay.
Briefly.
What? Wow.
After that.
Huh.
I don't know if they're still married, but yeah.
Spill that tea, Joe.
So can you be punk rock and still marry the guy from Nickelback? That's the real
Answering
question.
the age-old question.
I like to think that she just keeps going.
Yeah.
She just keeps rotating between people who've also written songs about photographs.
That's right. That's right. Absolutely. Oh man. And all this stuff sort of. So when I think of Avril Lavigne, I think, and maybe my timeline is off here, but I sort of think like, oh, that's after. That's not in like the sort of height of Enema of the State or something. I feel like that's like several years later in my mind, where it's like those things have already been baked in. I might be
sure. I don't think it's far
really
off.
Okay.
Because like I honestly think that window of like pop punk music videos on MTV was not as long as we remember it to be.
Sure.
And I think all that was happening in a within like 5 or so years.
That makes sense.
But I mean, Enema of the State was like a 2001 release or 2. Is that right? Or am I way off? Or was it like closer to like?
I could have sworn Enema was like 97 maybe, or 99.
It was, let me just tell you, 1999.
Was
99?
It 99?
Released in 99, June 1st, 99.
Wow.
Yep.
Wow.
Okay.
And 98% of Google users love this album. Oh, man.
That's wonderful.
They're so edgy. They had a porn star on the cover of the album.
Yeah. So maybe Avril was a little bit after that, but I do think you're right that like at least for me as I'm talking about it, it does, like, my mind makes it a much larger chunk of time than it probably was, just because I was in my late adolescence or whatever. But and so I was thinking through also, like, what is the timeline of the sort of There was this, I was having a conversation with my roommate right before we recorded this about this stuff, and I was telling him I was prepping for it and everything. And he said, yeah, for a little while, it was like the scene industrial complex, because I was talking about like Warped Tour, Hot Topic, and like Alt Press, sort of creating this whole little. So what are your guys' memories of that, or does that bring anything up for you with regard to this?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know exactly how to. You guys might hear Tiff now. Whenever the dogs are upset, she puts on this high, wacky voice, so if you hear that, like, just leave it in. Just leave it in. Sure, because that's just my
real life.
Yeah.
These are podcasts in the time of Corona. Exactly. You get what you get.
Yeah. So rephrase your question, Doc.
Just in terms of like this sort. I guess what's the word I want to use? Sort of the commodification, sort of like the thing turns into. I mean, it's pop punk, so it's not like NoFX playing DIY clubs in the 80s. Like, it's always a commercial thing, but once it becomes this sort of mainstream, it becomes pop music. Full stop. Then you have Warped Tour, you have Hot Topic, which is where you get the clothes so you can go to Warped Tour. You have Alt Press, which is where you can buy the magazine to read about the newest bands that wear the clothes from Hot Topic. You know what I'm saying? Like
and I think once it gets to that point, you know, for me, it's like, okay, I've got to dig deeper. I'm still going to find the music at Hot Topic in these places, but like I'm going to go for like the I'm going down for to try to find the band that's me, like, you know, the Saves the Days and the Say Anythings that like
you know, that's a really good point. I feel like as it was happening, it was really clear to us that was what was happening, if that makes any sense. We're like, we know that we love these bands, but our relationship that we have to these bands is ours. Yeah. And whatever Warped Tour or Hot Topic or Alt Press are doing, like that's kind of their thing, kind of. And maybe it was because we were actually like in the industry and we were a part of some of these conversations, but we were like, yeah, this is not magic. This is marketing dollars that does all of this stuff. But we're a band and some people are into our band, and we're real people. Yeah. And the connection that we have with other people's music, with these bands that we grew up listening to, even though we may not know them personally or have a personal relationship with them, we do have a very personal relationship with their art. Yeah. And that's something that belongs to us. And we can't just like throw the baby out with the bathwater. Right. You know what I mean? Right. And be like, well, they sold out, or because there's so many bands that got swept up into that. No Doubt was a huge part of the Warped Tour scene when it first started out as well. So I feel like it was kind of a catch-all for everything that was a little bit teen and fringe. Right. Yeah. At the time.
Yeah, definitely. No, and that's a good point about like, it is strange how, you know, you're talking about probably we had a different perspective on it, but like, I feel like probably a lot of people who deeply cared about that scene had that same perspective of like, that's marketing dollars, right? It's sort of hard to pre-make and package something that's based on punk rock, I guess, because it's sort of like baked into the cake that like you have some sort of aversion, even if it's very light, you have some sort of aversion to like commodifying your music or something. You know what I mean? Sure. I don't know.
Yeah, no, it's interesting because like I'm trying to think of the specific bands I'm thinking of, but like, you know, I think there are a large group of bands, and I think pop punk is kind of something that's kind of resurfaced a little bit, but like on a smaller level. It's not a mainstream thing. It's those kids that like just genuinely loved the aesthetic, right? They're still covered in tattoos. They probably spent a lot of time trying to like searching themselves to make sure that they actually were pop or punk rock, you know?
Sure.
You know what I mean? Like, yeah. You know, Billy Joe Armstrong, like declared a war on pop punk a few years ago, apparently.
Of course. Okay. Sure.
Like, it's like, come on, man. Like,
how are you going to
be cool, man? Be cool. Yeah. But like,
stop hitting yourself.
You know, you have these, you know, these bands like, what was the band? The da 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 da. You guys remember that band?
I feel like that's more a description of Drumline than it is.
No, that was the vocal. It started off
Tool?
No,
System of a Down?
Yeah. What was that band called?
I don't know, man.
I guarantee you there's X amount of listeners right now who are like, But it was like this mix of like hard, like
I love it.
what was it? Hold on. Will somebody hum the Jeopardy theme for a second?
Yeah, let the professional singer do it. I'm not going to do that.
Hold on. This is happening.
Okay.
What A Day to Remember.
Oh,
You guys
okay.
remember A Day to Remember?
A Day to
I remember the
Remember,
name.
okay.
I don't remember that song.
I was never into A Day to Remember,
Sure.
but I always felt like those guys were just like significantly tougher than I am, but they still played like they had like breakdowns and stuff
Yeah.
because like they had like a hardcore route, but it was just straight up pop punk music.
Gotcha.
You know, they were still singing like this. You know,
Sure.
but like
Sure.
you know, but they were like covered in tattoos and like they walk the walk, man.
Yeah.
They walk the
Yeah.
walk. And it was like, so there's this whole like subculture of like, sure, this thing and this aesthetic and this style is like a big mainstream thing,
Yeah.
but like, that kind of taste, that aesthetic is like, you know, do you know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah. Well,
Well, I would love
saying
to
a
know
thing?
what you guys think about this or what your experience was, but also like within that scene, within the pop punk scene, there is this awareness of kind of where you fit into it. So
Sure.
there was never a point where I personally would have ever walked into a room with like a bunch of tatted guys and assumed that I knew where they kind of fit in. If that makes sense, or how I fit in with them. It was like, you knew that everybody had a different relationship to punk rock.
Sure.
And if somebody was saying like, well, this is punk, like, I didn't get into conversations where we were deciding which things were punk rock and which things were not.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
Because
Sure.
that seemed like a very personal thing. And there were some people that were way older, like we knew that they were older than us, that they had a different relationship to this style of music.
Yeah.
And we didn't have any like illusions of grandeur that somehow we were carrying the torch of like tough fucking punk rock.
Sure.
We were like, we're literally just a couple of kids from Nowheresville, South Carolina. We're just happy to be here, y'all. Like,
Yeah.
I'm
Sure.
just,
Totally.
man, isn't this great?
Yeah.
Y'all got some cool tattoos. What kind of? Oh, you got a Marshall amp too? That's great. Like, it wasn't like we were trying to prove that we were more punk rock or that we fit. It was just like, no, we're just doing our thing.
Sure.
We don't think it's any more legitimate than what you're doing.
Right.
We're just,
Sure.
you know, can we just have a wide table for everybody to sit
Yeah.
here? And I enjoyed it. I enjoyed how, like, learning about punk history through meeting different people in green rooms that had had these different experiences
Sure.
with it, that had grown
Yeah.
up with different, touchstones
Yeah.
than we had grown up with musically, that we knew were the reason that we had the music that we had today. That, you know,
Yeah.
because you had the Ramones, you could have bands like Newfound Glory now.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think to some extent, how do I put this? I think to some extent, maybe some of that has to do, because there are those people out there who are sort of elitist about it, or sort of like gatekeepers, right?
Sure.
This is not punk. That's not punk, right? They wouldn't just say, hey, I think Avril Lavigne doesn't fit stylistically. They would say, no, fuck that music. It's not punk rock. You know what I'm saying? Like, there are those people, and I'm sure I've gone through phases like that when I was in my teens and stuff, you know? But I don't know. I wonder how much of that has to do with going back to, just to do a callback, I wonder how much of that has to do with like which type of sort of the myriad types of sort of rebellion you are into punk rock for. So in other words, if it's
Sure.
like, if you're a suburban kid, like middle class suburban kid, like maybe it's about being sad and emoting about some girl that you like or something like that. Whereas if like your jam is like The Decline and you're into it not just for the sweet ass bass riffs, but because of the politics, right?
There were some
Yeah.
those bass riffs though.
No, those bass riffs are dope as hell. Yeah.
Yeah, good luck.
Yeah.
Good luck attempting those.
Exactly.
Oh,
But you
man.
know what I'm saying? Like if you listen to that and you're like hyped up, and there's part of me that's like that, where it's like part of the reason I love NoFX is because of the just like fuck you politics kind of, you know.
Yeah, of
Sure.
course.
Yeah. And so I wonder if like some of that elitism comes out of that, of like, really, you guys are going to sing about some girl that you like, and I'm over here talking about like, you know, I'm over here talking about like tax revenue and stuff. I don't know.
Yeah. It's like Bane, right?
I'm sorry.
Explain yourself.
Yeah. How is it like, Bane?
You merely adapted the darkness. I was.
I thought you meant
I
because
don't
they were
know.
both like far left politics, but okay. Yeah, no, fair enough. Yeah, you adapted the darkness. Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, I feel like, I always feel like, especially like later in our bandhood, like I do feel like I don't think we were elitist by any means because we were like definitely a pop punk band and but like I do feel like we always had some kind of chip on our shoulder, like we were always trying to prove that like we were the real deal, if that makes sense. And that was probably a waste of time.
Do you mean are you
energy?
are you sort of are you talking about like post me, like after I was out? Okay,
Yeah.
all right, cool.
Yeah.
I wasn't sure.
Well, I think the weird thing about that is like you're like pop punk is very much, I feel like a youthful style of music.
Sure.
Like now I get a little tired listening to it.
Oh, that's interesting.
Sure. But having played all those shows and everything, like I love the energy in it. But the difference I feel like now is that when you are learning how to play an instrument, you're a teenager, you're in your early 20s, a lot of how you express yourself is through the catharsis of this music. So you hear these different political things and you're like, fuck yeah, that's how I feel. That makes perfect sense to me. Or yeah, that's how that breakup made me feel. That's how I'm emoting through these artists. And so you develop that connection.
Sure.
The older that you get, the less you are looking. And I had this conversation with a guy named Finn McKenty, has an amazing YouTube channel. And this is what he was like, the way that he described it was, I'm not looking for a band to tell me who I am anymore. I know who I am. And so I pick and choose the things that I'm into and I like them for different reasons now. I'm not looking for somebody to help me become an adult and phrase that.
Yep.
If that makes sense.
That's very, that's the juice.
He's a cool
That's why you're
dude.
here, folks. That's the juice right there. No, that's very true. That's very, very true. And it sort of makes me think, and I'll give my answer and then bounce this question back to you all. Like, I do think that there are, like, I still listen to some of what you would call pop punk, I guess. I don't mean I listen to stuff from my childhood, but I listen to bands now who have put out records in the last year or two that are, at least, by all intents and purposes, pop punk. So I'm thinking of bands like Jeff Rosenstock is sort of the main one that I listen to. He was in a band called Bomb the Music Industry a long time ago. And so he's like a dude in his probably late 30s, like a balding dude who looks kind of nerdy, and he plays like pop punkish stuff, but he sings.
Yeah, the aesthetic is totally pop punk.
Yeah, but he doesn't sing at all about sort of, the majority of his stuff is about like aging and about like rent prices going up. You know what I mean? It's not about, it's not about like it feels age appropriate to me, even though it's like pop punk, I guess, if that makes sense.
We've had this conversation before as well about Max Bemis and saying
yes, he was another one I was going to bring up.
Each album, that kind of like they progress along with his life.
Yeah, for sure. And I find those people fascinating who either sort of broke after they were broke into the scene after they were already late 20s, early 30s or something like that, or people who can really pull off that transition where it feels like, no, you found a way to be like a full out, no questions asked adult person who's just doing this type of music. You know what I mean? To where you're singing about stuff that like teenagers will not relate to you because you're an adult singing about adult stuff. You know what I mean?
Right.
And I think those are fascinating cases, and some of that stuff's like some of my favorite music. So,
well, I think the cool thing about this specific genre of music is that if you're not giving way too many fucks about it, it's pretty awesome in terms of like how wide it is. You have, I guess for lack of a better term, like you have your ribeyes and potatoes bands, but you also have your candy bars.
Yeah.
Like,
You got
and
your
who
Skittles.
doesn't love all of those at the right time? Yes, exactly. And so it's kind of like this weird buffet where you can derive as much meaning from it as you want, or you can just enjoy it as topically as you want.
Yeah.
And there's a place for all of it there.
Yeah. Right.
11T Life is a production of Rock Candy Recordings.